Before she was his prisoner, she was his queen. Before their sons waged war against their own father, they were heirs to a massive empire. This is the story of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, a medieval power couple whose love affair built a kingdom and whose betrayals almost tore it all down. It's a story of ambition, scandal, and a rivalry so intense it would pit two nations against each other for hundreds of years. In the mid-12th century, Europe was a messy patchwork of rival lords and ambitious kings. And on this chaotic game board, two people were about to make a move that would change everything. First, there was Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine. And she wasn't just any duchess. She ruled a huge, wealthy chunk of what is now modern-day France. She was also, in 1152, freshly single, having just had her marriage to the King of France, Louis VII, annulled. At around 28 years old, free from a stuffy marriage and with a reputation for being fiercely independent, she was the most powerful and eligible woman in Europe. And then there was Henry Plantagenet. He was younger, only 19, but he had a fiery ambition that was already the talk of the continent. As the Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, he also had a pretty solid claim to the English throne. When he and Eleanor met, the sparks didn't just fly, they were explosive. Just a scandalous 8 weeks after her marriage to the French king ended, Eleanor married Henry. Europe's courts were rocked. Not only was the speed shocking, but they were also third cousins, which raised more than a few eyebrows in the church. But the political fallout was the real bombshell. By marrying, they fused their lands. Henry's territories in northern France were now joined with Eleanor's massive domain of Aquitaine. The result? The Angevin Empire, a colossal territory that stretched from the borders of Scotland all the way down to the Pyrenees Mountains. Overnight, they had become the ultimate power couple, controlling more of France than the French king himself. Eleanor's ex-husband was furious and completely outplayed. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry's claim to England came through. He was crowned King Henry II, and together, he and Queen Eleanor ruled an empire that dominated Western Europe. Their partnership, born from scandal, seemed absolutely unstoppable. For the first decade or so, Henry and Eleanor were a dream team. This was a real partnership, built on genuine affection. They traveled their massive empire, dished out justice, and locked down their power. And Eleanor was no quiet queen sitting on the sidelines. She was in the thick of it, a ruler who knew how power worked. Together, they even built a dynasty, having 8 children, including 5 sons, like Richard, the future Lionheart, and John, the one who'd later be forced to sign the Magna Carta. But the very things that made them strong were also what would eventually tear them apart. Henry was a brilliant king, a legal genius even, but he also had a volcanic temper and a huge appetite for, well, other women. His affairs weren't just numerous, they were public, a constant humiliation for a queen as proud as Eleanor. As the years went on, the cracks started to show. Eleanor was a political force, but she found herself being pushed aside by Henry's need for absolute control. The partnership started to feel more like a cage. Then, in 1168, something shifted. Eleanor moved back to her home turf in Aquitaine, setting up her own glamorous court in Poitiers and taking her favorite son, Richard, with her. So was this a strategic move, a way for them to divide and conquer their vast empire? Or was this a separation, a queen carving out her own life away from a cheating, controlling husband? Historians still debate it. In Poitiers, Eleanor's court became the cultural epicenter of Europe, famous for promoting the ideas of courtly love and chivalry. But don't let the poetry fool you. This court had a sharp political edge. It was here, surrounded by her sons Henry the young king, Richard and Geoffrey, that the seeds of rebellion were planted. The boys were tired of waiting for the power their father had promised, but wouldn't hand over. And in their corner was their mother, a queen who felt she'd been cast aside and was now ready to fight back. In 1173, all that simmering tension finally boiled over into the Great Revolt. The biggest threat to Henry's empire wasn't a foreign army. It was his own family. Spurred on by their mother, three of Henry's sons, Henry the young king, Richard, and Geoffrey, openly declared war on their father. It was a massive betrayal, secretly funded by Henry's enemies, including Eleanor's ex-husband, King Louis VII of France. Eleanor threw all her weight behind her sons, turning a family squabble into a full-blown civil war. But they all made one critical mistake. They underestimated Henry. He wasn't just a king, he was a brilliant and ruthless general. He moved with lightning speed, crushing the rebellions on every front. One by one, his sons were forced to surrender and beg for his forgiveness. The revolt had failed. For his sons, Henry showed mercy. For his wife, there was only punishment. As Eleanor tried to flee and join her sons, she was captured. For masterminding the rebellion, Henry did the unthinkable. He imprisoned his own queen. For the next 16 years, one of the most powerful women in the world vanished from public life. Her imprisonment varied in severity, sometimes moved between castles in England, sometimes allowed small freedoms. But she was always a prisoner, her power erased by the very king she helped put on the throne. Henry's final years were anything but victorious. He'd won the war, but he'd destroyed his family. His remaining sons, Richard and John, never stopped plotting against him. The final blow came in 1189, when Henry learned that even his favorite son, John, had joined the latest conspiracy. Utterly heartbroken and defeated, the great King Henry II died, supposedly whispering, "Shame, shame on a conquered king." Henry's death meant Eleanor's freedom. One of the first things her son, the new King Richard III, did was order his mother's release. At nearly 70 years old, an age when most people were long retired, Eleanor stormed back onto the political stage. She ruled the entire Angevin Empire as regent, while Richard was off fighting in the Third Crusade. She secured his throne, raised a king's ransom when he was captured, and proved that her political instincts were as sharp as ever. The legacy of Henry and Eleanor is as massive and messy as their lives were. Their marriage created an empire that redrew the map of Europe, locking England and France into a rivalry that would eventually explode into the 100 Years' War. Henry's legal reforms became the bedrock of English common law, and Eleanor is remembered as far more than a queen. She was a cultural icon, a political powerhouse, and a symbol of female resilience in a world run by men. Their story is a love story, but it's also a political thriller. They were partners who became enemies, lovers who became jailer and prisoner. They built an empire together, and their war against each other nearly brought it to ruin. It remains one of history's most dramatic and consequential relationships, a royal marriage of power and love whose echoes we can still feel today. If you found this story of power, love, and betrayal as fascinating as we do, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible tales from history. We'd love to know what you think in the comments. Who was the more formidable figure, Henry or Eleanor?